You're listening to Barbell Logic,
the podcast where we talk about what it means to experience strength
and how you can use simple, hard, and effective strategies in training and nutrition to improve your life.
It starts with meeting you where you are right now and finding lasting solutions.
Welcome to the show. Welcome to the Barbell Logic podcast. I'm Matt Reynolds. I'm here with Niki Sims.
Hey, everybody.
Niki in Orange County. I'm in Tulsa, the beautiful Tulsa, Oklahoma. What is the temperature in Orange County right now? I bet it's better than it is here.
I think it's 70 degrees.
Gosh.
It's perfect.
It's 100
and
here.
it's like, so I've noticed that there are different kinds of 71 degrees and different kinds of 72 degrees, slightly influenced by humidity. So there's like a warm 72 and there's like a cold 72. Yeah. But I mean, the margin for perfection is huge. It's just all great.
That's the California weather tax that you guys pay.
But I also walked by a house that's for rent in my neighborhood, 3-bedroom, 1-bath, renting for $4,500 a month.
That's crazy.
Dear
crazy?
Lord.
That's so much more expensive than my mortgage. And my mortgage is, and my house is over 5,000 square feet. It's ridiculous. So,
someday I'll get sick of it, but not yet.
We actually had our church out of, we've got kind of a new church plant out to our cabin this past weekend for July 4th weekend. And we actually did like a church service on Sunday morning overlooking the bluff. It was cool.
Wow, that sounds amazing.
It was crazy because the sun is so hot. It was really hot that day. It was like 95. But we did the service at like 8 o'clock in the morning, and it was like 80, but the sun was beating down, and it had rained just a little bit that morning, and so it was like 90% humidity. 80 with the sun beating down, and you've been there up on the bluff where there's no trees, it was so hot. And then yesterday I went to the pool with Rachel, and it was 99, but cloudy. And I was like, This doesn't feel nearly as bad as it did at 80 in the sun at 8 a.m. on Sunday morning. So you're right. It's just bizarre.
It's like the sun is hot.
Yeah, so intense. Right now, it reminds me of when we went to Mexico in 2020 in the summer. We were supposed to go in April. And of course, because of COVID, it got pushed back. And then we ended up going, I think, in July. I will never do that again. Mexico in July, not a great place. And it was like that. It was like 100 degrees every day and also 90% humidity. It was just brutal. So
it's really hard to be happy.
Dog days of summer. Oh man, I've been I train my gym, which everybody's seen on the YouTube channel and stuff. It's just the rack basically. It's a big rack and platform. So I do all my main lifts in the beautiful air conditioned gym, and then I go out to the garage and do all my accessories. And I am sopping wet when I get out. I mean, it's like I'm doing lat pull downs and triceps and biceps. I was like, oh, this is so gross.
And I remember doing conditioning in your garage when inside your garage it was in the 40s.
I think it was like wintertime.
42 degrees.
See, that doesn't bother me at all. I just throw on more hoodies. Ugh. But you can only get so naked to do exercise. It's just like the neighbors start complaining.
I just love living in places where you can wear as few clothes as possible.
Yeah.
Because if I have to put on layers, I'm unhappy. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I would. I'm ready for a little bit of cool. We're going to go to Colorado here in a few weeks. And again, that's another one of those where it's like, it might be 90, 92, but it's so dry. You're just like, this is, your sweat evaporates and it cools you off. And so it's all right. So today.
Anyway, there's the weather report.
There you go. We are in a sort of a 3-part series talking about cues. We've talked about verbal cues, highly important cues. We've talked about tactile cues. And today we're going to talk about visual cues. And visual cues are interesting. I think we'll have maybe a good conversation and maybe a little bit of a debate here on how important they are in different realms of coaching. And so I just wanted to start without giving my... I sort of teased this out a little bit, I think, a couple episodes ago where I said, I think that visual cues are probably the most important thing or one of the most important things for online coaching, and that they are not very important, probably the least important thing for in-person coaching. And I realize I'm sort of making a very binary statement there. Everything's always a little less so. But how do you view, before we talk about like what cues you use specifically, how do you view the importance of visual cues in-person coaching, live in-person coaching first? Like how much do you use them, or how much importance do you see in them? How do you approach that?
Those are great when you need someone to mirror you, like in a setup position usually it comes a lot down to the press. I think I use it the most in the press, where you're able to stand kind of in front of someone because also you don't want them to, swing their head in the bar around to look at you, which totally will happen.
Right.
Watch out for your heads. So I think it matters a lot in the press more sometimes in the squat because you need to be able to be where they can see you, which is why they're so limited, is because there are only few times when you're able to do that. So it's like when you're doing the unloaded teaching instruction or, right between reps on like the press and the squat, I think more so than anything, maybe sometimes on the deadlift, but they're very useful because what we're trying to do with our cues is make a reaction happen quickly. So we have to bypass a lot of thinking.
Yes.
Right. We don't want someone to have to like think about the meaning of life when we're giving them a cue. It needs to be something that just like creates an instant reaction. And so that's why visual cues where you make someone mirror you work really well.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I had noted in my notes to talk about today is that the visual cue in person works really well when it's very simple and it doesn't require much thought. So in a situation where I think the mirror position is the best option. So for example, the first place I'll use it in the mirror position is actually on the squat, setting the stance width. So say, so you'll set your feet about hip width apart or shoulder width or something like that. But that requires some thought. Well, how wide are my hips? How wide are my shoulders? Is it my heels or hip width or my toes? And it's much easier when you're coaching somebody in person, just put your feet where their feet need to be, not even necessarily where your feet need to be. Right. And so I look at them and I'm standing right in front of them and I set my feet and I just go line your feet up with my feet. Boom. Now that's way easier than actually interpreting the verbal piece. And the press is the same way. It is very, very difficult. We've talked about this on other podcasts to get someone in the close grip, elbows forward, wrist straight position. By the way, this will be an important episode to watch on YouTube. If you haven't watched the Barbell Logic podcast on YouTube, go to the Barbell Logic podcast YouTube channel. So to be able to do this, and they can see the elbow forward, wrist straight, close grip position, vertical forearms, they can just mimic that as opposed to say, okay, close grip, elbows forward, wrist straight, and then they still don't do it all like, okay, that's elbows forward, but your wrists are bent. Now point your wrists to the top, and then they drop their elbows. And walking them through that verbally is actually much more difficult than just showing them. Right. Yeah,
totally. And I think visual cues work really well for something that's stationary. There's risk in demonstrating something to try and translate into a visual cue because you're going to look different than when someone's moving, and there are so many different pieces involved when someone's moving. So I think visual works really well if it's something stationary, like exactly like you said with the stance or the forearms and the press. But when it gets to moving, that's when I think it gets a little less reliable.
I was going to say the exact same thing. So a common mistake I think that I see young coaches make is that if this works for the stance width and the wrist position, elbow position, then it'll work for what the bottom of the squat is supposed to look like. It's one of my big pet peeves when someone's teaching somebody how to squat and the coach goes down into the bottom of a squat without a bar, like just a body weight squat, and say, do it like this. Like, dude, unless they're like a high level athlete and also built just like you, it's not gonna look that way. And so you can only take this so far. Again, if you think about that visual cue, that's pretty complicated and still requires a lot of thought. So if you get down into a deep squat and you say, just do it like this, that's not real easy to mimic, and it takes a lot more thought. Where if you're just like wrist straight and you show them wrist straight, that's very simple. So the more simple the visual cue is, the easier it is to mimic. And that's where I think it's valuable and often can even be better than the verbal cue, because just like you said, it's the goal of the cue is to do or say the least amount of things to get them to do it right now, as quickly as possible. And I think there are times where you can show them the stance, show them the wrist or the elbows in a press, something like that. And they'll do it much quicker than if you had to explain it all verbally.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah. I've been noticing that a lot in jiu-jitsu too, where it's like, if you're going through a movement sequence, there would be like 30 different still shots that you could grab where like one hand is here on their collar, then it goes to the sleeve, then your foot goes here. But if you were to try and perform that movement with the 35 different steps, that is not going to work. Like you're going to get overwhelmed and you're not even going to translate it nor to be useful. But if you start with, mirroring at the starting point, grips and where your feet are or whatever. And then you kind of explain the theory or the purpose, which would be kind of more of like, moving through the squat versus, like standing in front of someone squatting with them. That won't work. But like you can visually explain and show where the starting points are and then establish the theory.
That's right.
And use some more verbal cues while it's moving.
That's exactly right. So again, we're exactly on the same page because
it's like we agree about all of this.
Well, we've coached together like a decade. So there's that. Yeah. So I wrote down that visual cues without the verbal doesn't work very well unless it's really, really simple. And so one of the first places that we use visual cues for almost everybody in both an in-person and an online setting is we demo the lift, right? So if we're in a seminar setting, we grab, we got 25 people in the room, we grab a person out of the room and we walk them through what a squat looks like. So, and everyone else can see what that teaching progression looks like, what it should look like for the lifter, what the coach is doing. But you're giving, 90% of the instruction is still verbal, but they get to see it. And I actually think this is where visual cueing or the visual coaching is most effective when it's combined with the verbal, which I don't want to get ahead of myself, but this is really what we do in online coaching every single day. But it works the same way with in person. So barring those very, very simple things, mirror the stance, mirror the elbows, mirror the wrists. As you're giving those visual cues, you're also explaining or giving verbal cues as well. And I think the more we can give multiple facets of learning, then it really embeds itself in somebody's brain better. And so you hit all of those aspects of learning. It's not that you'll hear people often say like, well, I'm more of a visual learner or more. I don't even know, maybe, but I really think when we're able to hit all of those at once, it's better. As a matter of fact, I've read some stats. So when you read a book and listen to the audiobook at the same time, which is a little slower than just reading it silently, it just, for the vast majority of people, it embeds better. It just does. And so, and if you do that and then also highlight or take notes or underline or do the thing, like it's there's also sort of a tactile aspect as well. And so I think the more we can use all of those at the same time, I think it works very, very well. So we go to seminar, we demo the lift, we teach the lift, we show people how to teach it, we show people how to perform it. In online coaching, for every lift we prescribe on our software, there is a demo video for how to do that lift. And we've taken a lot of care and a lot of time to give both a gym short video, a 60-second or less video, a very quick snapshot of what that video what the lift should look like. But we also often have the longer form videos, which for us are still pretty short, 6, 7, 8 minutes long, but it gives a little more detail. And so somebody can really understand the whys. And the same thing is occurring in those demo videos that would happen in a demo in a seminar, where it's a combination of both visual and verbal that are occurring. I think that combination is there's a synergistic effect. It's not 1 + 1 = 2. It's 1 + 1 = 3 in that situation. So.
Yeah. It made me think of how, I think maybe in the first episode, we talked about getting someone from point A to point B. Like, I think the visual can really help us with the initial understanding of what point A is and what point B is. Sure. But the movement through relies a lot more on verbal.
That's exactly right.
And then kind of, like every freeze frame along the way is kind of a tangential, A to B, A to B, to B, to B. Sure. But you can't move through it like that because you're not going to do that with 315 on your back. Sure. But when you, again, coming back to just what you had just said earlier, is that when you can actually combine, there are times when any of these styles of cueing, verbal or visual or tactile, there are times when one is probably the best one to use to get them from point A to point B as quickly as possible. But the combination of the three often is think about the press. The starting position in the press is so you explain it to them, you show them, they mirror, elbows forward, wrists straight, forearms are vertical, close grip, all that sort of stuff. And you show them what it looks like, you tell them what it looks like, and then you have them do it, and then you grab their elbows, pull it forward, make sure their wrists are straight, and you actually give them the tactile piece as well. And they're like, oh, now I get it. And so that's why it's so effective to be able to have all of these tools in your toolbox. Have you ever coached anybody that is deaf? I haven't.
It's hard. You ever coached anybody that's blind?
Actually, no. Have you?
Less hard. Oh yeah, both. Blind is easy to coach because they can feel it and you can talk to them. So you still have tactile and visual, or tactile and verbal cues. But deaf is difficult because it is really hard to coach with no verbal cues. So you're only using visual and tactile. So you, as a coach for someone who's deaf, you have to stand in their, at worst, in their peripheral where they can see you and you're giving them motions and movements. And so, another thing that we'll use is often we'll mimic, again, if you're watching me on the video, you'll use your forearm to mimic the back angle. So you can take your forearm and your hand and you can say, no, bend over more than you think. This is the back angle on the squat. Or you'll say, when you start the squat, you're going to set the back angle, you're going to ride it down, hold the back angle, come all the way back up, hold the back angle, and then at the end, finish, right? You can also mimic the neck angle. This is why we don't want to look up, right? So the back angle is this. I want a neutral neck angle. I mean, this. I don't want to be looking down so much that my neck is, I don't want to be an overextension or overflexion either for the neck. And so you can often use sometimes not even the same body part to show them sort of what it should look like. And really what you're doing is you're just giving them little bits of information. Preferably, they're as simple as possible. They require the least amount of interpretation or interpretive thought.
Yeah.
They can just see and get. That's the idea.
Yeah. Reminds me of an error, so to speak, of newer coaches when they talk so much.
Yes.
And like, even when they're doing a visual cue, they'll be talking.
Yep.
And even when they're doing a tactile cue, they'll be talking. And I think it's okay for there to be fewer words and not
just okay.
I mean,
preferable.
Yeah, exactly. Like, think that'll happen with a newer coach because they're nervous as they'll, say the same thing 5 different ways at the same time. And that can be a little bit overwhelming. So it's okay. It's okay to shut up.
Yep.
Just show them the elbows.
The most effective communicators are the people who can say the most with the least amount of words. And, I've coached for a long time. I think I'm a pretty efficient coach on a platform. I'm not an efficient writer. I know this. Like when I write an article and then Nick Solin, our editor-in-chief, goes through and he deletes, he gets rid of like a third of the words because a third of them are unnecessary. And I go, oh, he is an effective writer. And so you can see it's the same concept. We want to get the most accomplished, get the greatest return on investment for the least amount of words, for the least amount of things. And so, and if you've ever been a coach where you've had to coach like a large group class or even a class, even a group of 4 to 6 people on a platform at one time, you have to learn how to be efficient. You can't speak long, full sentences to every single person on the platform that are lifting at the same time. And so you have to learn that. I mean, that's an acquired skill to figure out what words get the most accomplished, for the least amount of words that I'm going to say. And so that's huge. And so, and one of the deals you'll see a lot of new coaches, even especially in the beginning of a lift where they're in the empty bar or the body weight phase, they make the lifter stay in the position for far too long. So, you put them in the bottom of a squat and they don't have the bar on their back yet. And they're kind of explaining the bottom of the squat and the person starts like shaking and their hamstrings are getting, I can't. And you're like, it's like, how many times in a seminar of like, hey, let them stand up. Come on, stand up. Because they're down there too long. Like if you can't get them to, because really what you're trying to do when they're in the bottom of a squat or any of these positions is you're trying to imprint this on their brain, what it feels like in some scenarios, certain things in your peripheral and your eyesight of what it looks like, not a mirror. We'll get there here in a minute. But just like, okay, this is the correct bottom position. Remember what this feels like. This is great. Now stand up with this. Boom. And you whack them on the sacrum or whatever and make them stand up. Good. That's it. You don't go down there and explain for 35 seconds while they're standing in a paused air squat for 35 seconds. And especially for somebody who's untrained or detrained, an overweight 45-year-old person is like dying down there. So yeah, the efficiency is king. Efficiency is important both for the lifter because you want to protect their time. They're paying you for the hour, they're paying you really by the minute. You want to protect your time. You want to get as much done as possible. I remember thinking when I was an early coach, a young coach, I could only get a couple lifts in with my lifters in an hour. And after doing that for 15 years, I could get 3 lifts in and a conditioning accessory circuit all in an hour.
Such a good point.
You're just like, it's the density of work you can get in the same. And it's not quite the same in an online coaching situation where they're not really paying you by the hour, or if you're training with training partners or you're training yourself, like, it doesn't matter as much. But for coaches who are coaching by the hour, by the 90-minute session, and they're paying for the time, you really want them to get as much value out of that time block as possible. And that requires efficiency. And that requires a combination of having a good handle of all of these types of cues: verbal, visual, and tactile.
Mm-hmm. How do we do visual cueing when we're online?
Well, it's huge. It's I think it's the primary advantage in online coaching over in-person coaching, is that you get this incredible, especially what we do now. So again, we go back to the olden days. We would watch videos of our clients. We've always broken down videos of the clients. That was from the time I first started doing online coaching full-time in 2016. And really even before that, when I was doing it part-time, I knew what.
I'm imagining someone, instead of submitting a video, just giving us a verbal explanation of how their squat went.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, most online coaching is just, there is no technique breakdown at all. It's just the program.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And there's no concept of how effective or efficient or correct the lift is from a technique standpoint. And so I knew for me in the beginning, and this is the thing I think that separated us as a business in those early years, especially, was that we were the only ones breaking down technique in online coaching, which seems ridiculous because that is coaching. And so in those early days, we were watching video and we were typing feedback. And type feedback is interesting because it's verbal, but it's not really verbal. It's written. It's written feedback. And we still will sometimes use some written feedback. Now my preference with written feedback is, all caps, bold, bullets, 2 words, 3 words, right? Things that they can remember. It's almost like it's a visual cue. It becomes
their cue.
It becomes a visual cue, I think, even. So at least for me, if I see a bulleted this cue, I remember what it looks like. I don't think necessarily about what that 3-word phrase sounds like, so that when I am squatting and I'm thinking about the cue, I'm actually like the actual visual, the picture of the bullet point that the coach wrote is in my brain. I'm thinking of that, right? Now, far more effective, we almost all do screen recordings. And so you as a lifter now get to watch yourself lift and hear your coach speak over that lift. And so you get this beautiful combination of both visual, because you get to see what the coach sees, and verbal. They walk you through and talk to you and give you verbal cues as they're watching the lift. And so it's just this super efficient thing. Beyond just that piece, there are so many things we can do in online coaching. We can pause, we can rewind, we can slow it down in slow motion, we can draw on the screen, we can show the bar path. There's all these things that you can't ever see in person. Bar path is something you're just trying to feel for, and it's an important thing to feel for. That I think we talked about it last episode about like that master cue of bar over midfoot or midfoot balance. Those are things that we can feel for. That's a tactile thing. I almost said tactical again. But in online, you can actually see what it looks like. I often will pause and I show the feet, the shoes all the time to my clients. I go, look, watch right here. Watch the weight shift to the ball of your foot, and then watch it shift back to your heel to overcompensate, 3/4 of the way up to squat. So I use that visual cue is massive, and learning how to, you ever think about how good you are at pausing video and running video frame by frame and show, like, just at the right spot to show your clients, because you do it every day, a million times a day. Like, I don't know if you've ever even thought about that, but it used to be, it would just play. And now you're like, oop, check this out, pause, back it up 3 frames. Look at this. Look at it shift right here. Look at your shoe.
Look at your back. Exactly right. Yeah, totally.
So that's how I use it. I mean, how do you look at it or view that?
Yeah, I think it helps them or increase their own understanding of their lifts by, getting to have that out of body experience where be like, this was good that you did. I see that you did this. You can notice it here. it might have felt this way. I want it to feel this way instead at this point. So you get to really walk through with them where, earlier in the days, we would, even before I had an online coach, I would watch my own lifts,
Sure.
but it still was not as a robust experience because I didn't have like the expert looking at it
Sure.
too. So it's awesome to have like that second set of eyes being like, oh, I felt it this way. And then because sometimes it'll just turn into this validating thing when you watch your own videos. But then when you have someone else look at them and point out like, oh, I didn't even notice, watching the center of the bar, what that was doing.
That's right.
And helping them translate. It's hard because, it's usually been 12 hours or something since they felt it.
Sure.
So you kind of will set them up to pay attention to something to feel for next time based off of what we saw visually. So I think that's what I try to do a lot of is relate that to how they're going to feel or how I want them to feel next time based off of what I see and then help them see it also.
Yeah. No, I like that. I when I think about being a client, which of course we are and are lifters and utilize visual cues and where our eyes are supposed to be as a lifter as well as a coach, I think about we're always setting eye gaze somewhere. So, your eye gaze is supposed to be in a specific spot as a lifter. We don't want it looking at ourselves in a mirror, right? One of the downsides of a lot of public gyms is that they put the squat racks right in front of big mirrors. And so it's very difficult. It's very distracting to lift in front of a mirror. And you've got to really try to help your clients. Like, hey, I often will have them take a 2.5 pound plate or something and put it down on the floor and just like look at that plate. Don't look at the mirror. Really try to not look at the mirror, turn around in the squat rack and face out, into the middle of the gym. If that's possible, we'll do that as well. But I think also you touched on as an online client, I encourage my clients to video all of their warm-up sets. And I just say delete it when you're done with the workout.
Yeah.
And take that 30 seconds after each warm-up set and just watch it really quick and see how does depth look? How's your back angle on squat? Like whatever that thing is, so that you can see that your form, you're not allowing form creep in any specific session. And then they post the lift and they get the feedback from the coach. But adding to what you just said, I often notice as well that the more they do that, the more their eye is refined as a coach.
Totally.
And so in the beginning, they don't have any idea. Like you're giving them this information, and like you said, they've got this professional watching their video, and they're like, "Oh wow, this is really good information." I actually love it when my clients will tell me, "It looks like I did this," and then I get to confirm, "Yes, you saw it right. That's exactly what you did." And so you get to watch your own clients, and so many of my clients especially have become coaches over the year. They join the academy and they start walking through that, and so they refine their eye. And I think the first place to be able to do that that's very low risk and very high reward is just watching your own videos and sort of breaking down your own videos or thinking about what cue would you give yourself if you're coaching yourself. It is difficult sometimes to pull yourself emotionally out of that and to look at yourself as if you're just a completely different person. Like I'm coaching another person, even though it's you, and thinking through that. But I think being able to do all those things, it just makes what we do in online coaching that much more effective because they get to start. I want them to think about it before they ever hear from me. Now, not in the beginning when they're a brand new lifter. They're just doing the best they can to survive and not die under the bar. And then they get the cues from the coach or from you, and they make the corrections. But as time goes on, I actually want them to think about what's the visualization. And then what I think happens, then the other thing we haven't touched on is I think visualization as a lifter is actually a really big deal and is really important and is vastly underused. So when I'm getting ready to do a heavy lift, a big lift, a scary lift, a PR lift, or something, I always visualize what that lift should look like, what it should feel like under the bar. I often will start with the visualization of what it should look like. And so I literally think in the sort of downtime before, in the rest time before that set, I start thinking to myself, well, how is this going to look? How should it look? If that's going to look like that, what's the primary cue I need to focus on? If I do that, what will that feel like? So for me, I've talked about before, that midfoot cue is such a major deal for me on squat. If I let the weight, I'm not a weight shift to the ball of my foot, I'm a weight shift to the heel. I'll shift back too far to my heels. And so I start thinking like, okay, pressure on midfoot. If I do that, it'll look like this. And you can start to visualize that. Well, I think it's way easier to visualize what it should look like if you've watched yourself squat on video 10,000 times, and you've not only watched yourself squat on video 10,000 times, but you've heard feedback from your coach about that squat. And so I think that visualization piece is really important. So it's not about just going out there and just trying to do it. It's thinking through, what would it look like? What does it feel like? If this goes well, what, and so I think that's sort of the last piece of the value of, or the reward for spending the time to really think about what these visual cues do and what they look like and what they should look like for you, or what they should look like as a coach. I sort of put myself in a position as if I were a coach watching myself squat, it would look like this. I don't really think about what I'm looking at, because I'm looking at, there's a little knot in the plywood that my eyes are set on, and that's it. I'm not using visual cues while I'm lifting, but I do use them beforehand.
And what you've really helped your lifters do is you've created their own lifting model that they can use for themselves. Like,
that's exactly right.
The coach goes in, we have a model of what we want it to look like, but we know it's going to look a little bit different for each lifter based off of how they're built.
Yep.
But over time, we help them. They have their own mental model of like, I need to look like this. And when you first start, you have no idea what that is.
That's right. That's right.
But over time, gradually, you're able to visualize, because like when it is a good lift, it looks like this.
That's right.
So you're not comparing yourself to another lifter who doesn't look anything like you. You're able to compare yourself to yourself. And I think that over time is really powerful.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I think a lot of our lifters are, we tend to have, we have a lot of intelligent, deep thinking and sometimes overthinking lifters that at Barbell Logic. And so they often know what the perfect model squat looks like for that body, for whatever the average body type is. For the 5'9" male who's a little bit longer torsoed and a little bit shorter femored. And then a lot of times my newer clients will say, why don't I look like that? Like, because you're not built like that.
Yeah.
And so you have to have a little bit of a paradigm shift. Like, it's not going to look exactly like it looks in the demo video or in a book. It's going to look like this is what it's supposed to look like. So you're exactly right. You start to build that model, and it's perfectly fine to come in with the model of sort of what middle of the bell curve should look like. But there's a lot of people that aren't middle of the bell curve, you included, right? So that long-legged, short torso, it's not going to look like somebody who's long torsoed and short femored. It's just going to look different.
Yeah.
And so you're like, why am I bent over so much?
There's so much to anthropometry that's more than like the longer segments. There's like how their hips are built.
That's right.
What's the symmetry of their shoulders?
Sure.
Like, do they have a little bit of scoliosis? Like, there is so much more to that individual body type than just the segment length, which I think newer coaches understand. But the more lifters you work with, you're like, there is more to it than that.
Sure.
This lifter is going to move in a wobbly way through this range of motion. No matter what I do, that's their model.
That's right. You look at that side plane a lot, that sagittal plane, and you kind of compare what should it look like from the side or from that rear oblique angle, the coach angle. But, lifting occurs in 360 degrees. And so to see the difference between what the front plane or the back plane looks like, or the transverse, or all of these different, like any various angle can look dramatically different from lifter to lifter. And so to build that model in 360 degrees and not just a 2D sagittal or side view, and that's a really important view. Like, it's probably the first most important view in the very beginning, but then to start to realize like, oh, where do the asymmetries come in? What's going on in my, the length of my humerus versus the length of my forearm, which we don't talk about a lot. Like, my shoulder's tight. I've got a bum left shoulder. I tore my rotator cuff in high school throwing footballs or, whatever it is. And so all of those visual things, I think, yes, they very much matter. And so there are several takeaways here. One is, if you are a lifter who doesn't have a coach, which obviously I would love to, you should have a coach. But if you don't, and a lot of people don't, you can still watch yourself. I would challenge anybody or encourage anybody to video themselves on all of their lifts and just watch them you'll learn so much more about your own lifting. You'll learn a lot about bar speed, things like that. Again, bar speed is another one that we see all the time. And when you can see it as a lifter for yourself, you start to identify, what is my normal bar speed? That changes dramatically based on lifters, based on how explosive they are, based on how young they are, things like that. And so I can see for my lifters that I've coached for a long time, even if the lift is just fine and they get through into all their sets, no problem. It's like, it's a little slower than normal. It's a little slower than it should be. And sometimes I'll say that to them. Sometimes I won't. Sometimes I just make a note Like we may have a deload coming up. There's some slowness there, or the other way around, where we're like, whoa, that was super fast. Like, man, great job. We still got some growing room here in adding some more intensity to the bar. And so things like that will really help you as a lifter, whether you have a coach or not. Certainly then having a coach to get that additional feedback is just invaluable. I mean, it's so important. And then as a coach, learning how to use the visual cues where they will be synergistic or a true addition, a true bonus to the other cues is really important. Learning how to have all of these verbal, visual, and tactile cues in your toolbox and knowing when's the right time to play that card or to use those cues for efficiency's sake, right? What's going to get you the best bang for your buck or the best return on investment for the least amount of words or the least amount of movement, or the tiniest, shortest visual cue. We always start with that. And then it doesn't always work the first time. Sometimes then we have to move to a different cue, or again, a combination of visual and
That's the new
verbal.
one.
That is, I mean, in fact, that is the best cue, is a visual cue. Of verbal or visual. So yeah, I think here's what it comes down to. It comes down to being really intentional about thinking about what you're doing as a lifter and a coach, thinking about your own lifts and thinking about what should it look like, what should it feel like, and actually caring enough to not just get through the set and be done and never worry about it again and check the box. I'm done. Like that works for a while. As a coach, it's the same thing. Being very intentional about what your lifters' lifts, what your athletes' lifts should look like, feel like, all of those things, and being able to communicate that well to them.
To rate the quality of your cues is like, is my lifter doing a good job now at the end of the set? Did it change? And if it's not the same, then that's your tell. Like, you need to approach this a little bit differently.
That's right. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you did something wrong. Sometimes it just means that for whatever reason, that cue didn't make the light bulb go off for that lifter. And sometimes I still get this all the time, where 80% of the time, 90% of the time, this specific cue works for people. But 10 or 20% of the time it doesn't. And it doesn't mean that I screwed it up. It just means that, and it doesn't even mean that they screwed it up. It just means that for, you're testing out these things and you're trying to find the thing that makes the light bulb go off and make them change the movement in the positive. And so being able to have all three forms of these cues, as well as probably 4 or 5 verbal cues, visual cues, and tactile cues that all do the same thing in your back pocket, in your toolbox, helps you be the most efficient coach you can be. That's the key.
Totally. Excellent. I love it.
There you go. There is your series on cues, visual, verbal, and tactile. And so hopefully this will help bring you value both as a lifter and a coach. Test the stuff out, right? And so you've got an opportunity as a coach, especially to think about, or even we've had clients or students in the academy often make lists about, okay, if I'm trying to get the knees to go out, here are a list of all the verbal cues that I might use, but here are also tactile cues I might use to do the same thing, and here are visual cues that I can use to do the same thing. Those are important things to think through. So again, you build up, if you've got 8 or 10 options that all do the same thing, then one of those things is going to work. And probably it's going to work on number 1 or 2 or 3. You're not going to have to get down to number 8 to get there. So that's the key, man. We're just trying to build a bigger and bigger toolbox every single day. Mm-hmm. So if this brought you value, we would love a 5-star review. They help so much. Again, 5-star reviews are tremendous for us. Again, we ran, I think last month, Apple Podcasts suggested us a ton. It made the downloads go up tremendously. So if you haven't given us a review, we would love a review of the podcast, and we'll continue to try to bring value. We've got great podcasts on the horizon for both coaches with CJ and Niki. Again, a little teaser if you haven't heard, I'm here in Tulsa because I'm going to record with Hambrick. I think 3 episodes tomorrow. We're going to do a little throwback and do that about once a year, I think. As long as he behaves, then there'll be 3 episodes. Maybe there'll only be 2. We'll see. We'll see if he behaves himself.
Everyone's going to be like, bring Scott back.
They're like, no, they'll be like, I thought you said there were going to be 3 episodes. There were only 1. I was like, well, we had to edit out 80% of what he said. so no, it should be good to go hanging out on his farm and just do a little catch up with Hambrick and talk a little bit of MED programming, some stuff we haven't talked about before. And, since we've talked about that, we've coached many more people. He continues to coach for us, and we learn, and so we're going to talk a little bit about what we've learned about those things. I'm looking forward to hearing those. So yeah, I'm excited as well. So hope you all have a great week. We'll see you next Tuesday, and here in a couple weeks we'll be back with Hambrick for a few weeks. See you soon.
Bye, everyone.